mystic because John the Baptist is his associate. And John the Baptist, as we know, opposes the Jewish political elite to the point where Salome has his head eventually on a platter for Herod. But these people were mystics and expected the end times and God's appearance at any moment. Then we have the Sadducees. If we read the Gospel of John carefully, we see an account of the trial of Jesus, and it seems pretty clear to me it's the Sadducees who want Jesus dead. The Romans have no interest in executing what they thought of as religious crazy guys. They didn't. They're worried about these zealots, though. And why would the Sadducees are running the temple? The Pharisees are actually the good guys and the ancestors of all modern Jews. Jewish rabbi's daughter once said, you know, I really hate it when Christians tear off on the Pharisees. She says, those are my ancestors. They created synagogue Judaism, not the big temple with its big business. So why would the temple priest here, Caiaphas, oppose Jesus? And who's responsible for this crucifixion? It is a Roman method of execution, particularly cruel. Jewish methods of execution, had Jesus been killed by those, would have been strangulation. Much better way to go than this. Tens of thousands of people were executed by Romans for what they thought were treason or rebellion, with what I like to call these as billboards, basically saying, don't mess with Rome. Tens of thousands of people on the Appian Way were strung up like this in northern Italy for rebellion. The Spartacus slave rebellion, those people were all crucified. So you say, well, Powell, then clearly he was killed by the Romans. And of course, you know, all of this consciousness comes from being on the invasion route. But let's look quickly. Now, here's why Caiaphas would want him dead. Do we remember making the whip of cords and overturning the tables of the money changers? What would happen, and I guess my students, if I went into a Catholic or Protestant church in Wausau, and I was so mad they were supporting rich things, a lot of rich people, let's say, in that church, and I quoted Amos and the Bible guys, and I made a whip of cords, and I went up after the offerings collected, pushed the table over, and started beating the priest or minister, what would happen to me, you think? Would they say, this is a great prophet of God? I didn't know what would happen to me. I'd at least be arrested, and I'd probably serve some time. I doubt they would execute me. Well, right, you're right. I guess we did it twice. So let's look at this man, and here is the big dilemma for Christians. And when we look at Christian denominations, they all fall on a spectrum that generally is looking at how much is Jesus human versus how much is Jesus God. For example, we'll look at this. Just the issue of, is Jesus a prophet, or is he the very God of gods and the creator of the universe? And there's always been the spectrum, and we'll look at that. Jesus is from the boondocks, if you will. He is a Jew, but he's living among Samaritans, and not only Samaritans, but Greeks. It seems certain to me he knew at least as much Greek as you and I know Spanish. We all know what a burrito is, right? We all know a taco and the like. We all know some Spanish, and he knew at least some. And he knew Greeks or Gentiles, people who were not Jewish. In fact, the Decapolis, the Decapolis. Those are the 10 cities comprised of Greek immigrants. There's a lot of tension with the Jews and these immigrants coming into their land, and their dominance by Roman authority. Again, idolatrous Roman authority with the worship of the emperor, very offensive to Jews. But Jesus is this kind of lover, not like Krishna. He is not an erotic lover, but he's a lover of children. And women are attracted to him. In fact, they fund his ministry. It is women who put together his expensive seamless gown, for example. And then, as we just mentioned, this scene in the temple, read the Gospel of John for an account. Caiaphas coerces Pilate to kill Jesus because he needs Jesus gone because the temple makes a lot of money for him and the Sadducees. But he doesn't want to kill Jesus himself through some judgment of Jesus as blasphemous for using the divine name, although it seems that's the reason, according to the Talmud, much later writing. They hung Yeshu from a tree for practicing magic and leading the people astray. So he has two issues. He opposes the use of God's temple to make money, and he's used the divine name to perform miracles. And for Jews, that is not allowed. So, here he is before the night he is betrayed. There's been more and more evidence that Jesus and Mary Magdalene had something going. You don't have to go as far as the Da Vinci Code to see that when we've had the Gospel of Mary say he loved her more than his disciples. And this latest Mary fragment, something's cooking there. Is Jesus quite the celibate, priestly type that he's painted to be? I don't know. I'll just throw that out there. But here he is as King of the Jews. This is just a mockery of both the Jews and this now early Jewish movement. And when we translate even the word Christianity, not many know this, but Christ means, of course, Messiah or Mashiach, which literally means the anointed. The first Mashiachs or Messiahs were in fact these judges who conquered Canaan. They were generals anointed to lead the Israelites. But now this word Christ, of course, will be expanded with Christianity. And let's see why and how that happens. Again, women appear at his resurrection. They're there while he's crucified. They don't run away, unlike, if we recall, Peter does. So the enormous appeal of Jesus' message for women and the outcast of any sort, even the tax collectors. They're collecting taxes for the Romans. That makes them traitors. And hence his unpopularity. The Christian movement will spread very quickly after Jesus' death because of the Roman Empire and the roads. And St. Paul the Apostle will travel by ship to Rome and many, many places, as we may know, within the first few decades after Christ's death, and from there, of course, everywhere else. There will be Asian brands of Christianity that don't look anything like Protestant or Catholic brands do here. And we get three types of Christians pretty early on. Judaizers will say, Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, Yeshua, that's his name. Yeshua HaNatsri, if you want to know his name. He is a prophet. Muslims agree with this Jewish Christian point of view as well. And the Gnostics who say, no, he's not only God, he is so much God that he didn't even need to eat or defecate. And then, of course, Paul the Apostle. Let's just look at this. Here's his brother, James the Just, who doesn't appear in his ministry, but after Jesus' death, he's part of Jesus' family. That makes him specialer, to use some bad English, than anybody else. And he is head of the Jewish Christian movement. He worships at the temple. He, too, is executed just before the Romans come and smash the Jews for one of two major times. And here it is, faith without works is dead. Martin Luther wanted to get rid of the letter of James because it was, quote, too Jewish. How about that? He wanted to get rid of the Jewish elements in the New Testament. Not many know this. Gnosticism, though, look at St. Thomas on an Indian stamp. We already know how Indian religion works. We saw how Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu. That's what the Gnostics said Jesus was. The Gnostics claimed the God of the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible is evil, is rather ignorant, is jealous, violent, and is not the source of wisdom. Jesus is from a God beyond his or Jehovah's knowing, the true God of light and life. And Jesus is a projection into our world. And thus he never died according to them. He magically swaps bodies with a guy named Simeon according to their writings. And Simeon is crucified, not Jesus. Believe it or not. The Gnostics believe that, in fact, their magic mantras, meditation, and true knowledge, that's what the name Gnostic means, the knowers, unlike the Judaizers or the followers of this God. How is it that St. Paul's letters win the day for Christianity? Is it that he is more genius than the Gnostics? Or more genius than the Judaizers? It isn't. It's actually that St. Paul creates the synthesis that will win the day. He incorporates enough Jewish material, for example. For him, Christ certainly came in the flesh, it seems. He's not a Gnostic, although the Gnostics claim him too. But his big thing is to break with Judaism. And he claims, making a big argument in Corinthians, that Abraham was chosen by God for his faith, not for what he did. And he makes the big argument that all foods are clean now. You don't have to follow kosher laws. And what made Christianity in particular successful over the Judaizers, they'll die out, although they'll reemerge as Jehovah's Witnesses and many other heresies, if you will, was getting rid of circumcision. A lot of Greeks and Romans admired Jewish monotheism by this point in time. But how many men in this room would convert to a religion that requires circumcision? Not me. Well, what can I say? I'm afraid they got a lot of us at birth. Yeah. Right. Thanks to Judaism. Darn it. Okay, I guess. So Paul synthesizes the Jewish and Greek elements most successfully. His letters are written in excellent Greek, as is the Gospel of Luke. The Gospel of Mark is written in Greek with quite a few grammar mistakes. For example, it even ends with the word "and," which is bad in any language. And what, Mark? So they add endings later. So Christianity will spread through the Roman Empire, and it will be enormously popular with women and slaves. Once you get the majority of the population, half of it are women, always, roughly. And in olden times, maybe 80 to 90% were slaves. And so that made it dangerous. And we wonder, why did the Romans persecute and execute these Christians? Now it's not Jews doing this. Now it becomes Romans persecuting Christians. And look at this terrible, terrible treatment. Fed to lions, burnt at stakes, you name it. And by this time, of course, Christianity is turning even more and more Greek. We see in the Bible even Jesus turns water into wine. That's Dionysus' job. He's called the Good Shepherd. That's Hermes' title. And here Hercules descends into Hades and then is exalted as a constellation and thus a divine being. None of this fact of descending into hell and then exalted to heaven, we don't see that in the New Testament. That's the increasing penetration of Greek and Roman thought into this once Jewish religion. And so this is why the Christians were persecuted. It always shocks people. Perhaps some of you lived through the McCarthy period. Anybody? Okay, we got a few. Before my time slightly, but this may remind you of the McCarthy Red Scare stuff. The Christians were atheists to the Romans. They would not worship the emperor as divine. They rejected the existence of Jupiter and friends, so they're atheists. They're communists, and it says clearly in Acts, the book of Acts, the Christians shared everything in common. The rich shared with the poor members, and they lived in tightly knit communities. They didn't offer incense to the emperor because they're not going to worship an idol. It's that much Jewish still. And they're not going to offer their allegiance to a state. Their kingdom is not of this world, as Jesus said. Jehovah's Witnesses still hold a lot of these things to their hearts to this day. But for eating babies, you're going to wonder, gee, Powell, why do you have that there? That's kind of crazy. Why would Romans and Greeks believe that the Christians were eating babies? Well, think about this. When the Romans wanted an abortion, they didn't want their baby. They would leave the babies by the rubbish heap in town, hoping someone might pick up the baby and raise it. It's the only chance that baby's got. The Christians would collect these babies. Christians have been pro-life for a long time, very long time. So they take these babies and raise them as Christians. Then Greeks and Romans know that, the Christians drink blood and eat bodies at their festivals. Where did they get that body and that blood? Ooh, must be they're eating those babies. There were cults that ate babies, Fiestian feasts. Now we know that's not true, and that's why we should never suspect a new religion as a cult is just bad. Really, we need to investigate it like we might Scientology, right? Well, I didn't just judge it, I had to look into that one. And then I thought it was kind of crazy. But that's what happened there. We'll get 4 major churches, and we can see this. I took a course in iconography, and the Catholic Union priest said absolutely Christian art comes directly from Greek artistic practices. So we don't see depictions of images in Judaism, but now we do in Christianity, even statues and idols. A big cry, a far cry from the Jewish original religion. The church fathers will finalize the Greek and Jewish synthesis, and Constantine will finally, because by the time 325, when Constantine declares the religion is legal and they can practice in public, and he will start the first Christian church and convene the Council of Nicaea to codify what books should be in the New Testament and what should be rejected. The Gospel of Thomas, did it make it? Actually, Christians in India still hold that as their major gospel, as you might imagine. Indian Hinduism is quite a bit like Gnosticism. So this becomes the official Christianity of the Roman Empire. And then St. Augustine, I should mention, too, incorporates the doctrine of original sin into the religion. It wasn't there. And the Eastern Church rejects this idea that we're born with sin just through the act of intercourse. And we'll see his emphasis on celibacy will become a Catholic emphasis. That will not be true with the Eastern Orthodox churches. The Eastern Orthodox tend to view Christ like this, a little more leaning towards a Gnostic view. They talk about theosis for every Christian. This means that if I love and follow God's will closely enough, I can too attain Jesus' powers, the powers of God. And this is the Christ the Eastern Orthodox tell you is the real picture. But in the West, where the persecution was more severe, actually here, let's just take a look. There's the Nicene Creed, kind of summed up briefly. We don't see this stuff in the New Testament, though. It's a big evolution of this religion. The first church, Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, today Istanbul, and the oldest in existence, the Vatican, of course. The Latin Patriarchate is what the Orthodox call it, not Roman Catholicism, because they are too. The universal church, they claim. And so the pagan religions are gone by the 6th century, and it is a Christian Europe that looks something like this. A Roman world with Germans just poised to pour into it, and the Romans are as afraid of Germans as in the United States many are of Mexicans, right? You know, a big wall, keep them Germans out. We know those barbarians, what they'll do if you give them an inch. So that's the world. The Huns will push the Germans, though, into Rome. Rome falls, and now we have Vandals. That's where the word comes from. German tribes people called Vandals, the Goths, the Visigoths. Rome is trashed, except in the east, the Byzantine Empire lives on. It will become the seat of Orthodox Christianity. And then 7th century, we're moving pretty fast, Muhammad will become the next famous anti-temple prophet. Think about it. Why is Muhammad opposed? Because he opposes the idolatry of the Meccan temple complex that was big in his region. In this sense, he follows the prophets of Israel, but also Jesus himself in being an anti-temple prophet who advocates for the equality of all people and is famous for freeing 24,000 slaves in his life, believe it or not. And how does this little Arab ragtag Muslim army defeat finally the great Persian superpower and even push the Byzantine superpower back and expand within 100 years of Muhammad's death all the way from Spain to Afghanistan? Well, imagine you're a Persian slave soldier, and you know you're fighting people that if you surrender and run to their side, they'll give you your freedom. Would you still fight for the Shah of Iran if you knew you could be a free man if you just joined the Muslims? So these guys often, they keep on running across the battlefield, I surrender. And then they're using their fancy Persian weaponry on the Persian Empire itself. It crumbled in the face of one powerful ideology, Islam. And of course, coming right out of Judaism that we looked at. Europe looks like this then. The Catholic Church is the only thing holding Western Europe together. Thanks God for the Pope, I say, in the Dark Ages. And Europeans, and we can say Catholics, in the Holy Roman Empire as it's called, are feeling squeezed by both Mongols from the east and Muslims in Spain. Even the Muslims will get as far as invading France and are defeated at Tours. But there's immense paranoia in Europe about Islam. And this is an important awareness competency, I think, for everyone to know. My students, I repeat this slide a few times. For 1,000 years, Islam is the scientific superpower. Islam is the place where things like refined sugar and coffee are developed. Could America even exist without refined sugar? I don't think so. So we owe Islam so much, and we forget that every culture has its downs, its peaks, and its valleys, right? And Europe was in a valley when Islam was at a peak. In the meantime, the Orthodox and Catholics split in 1054. What is the reason? The Orthodox will tell you the Pope got too big for his britches. He claimed to be the first among equals among the four classic patriarchates, and the Patriarch of Constantinople and the Pope almost simultaneously excommunicate each other, which means there is no real Christian in the world, because they had equal authority, and it was like matter and antimatter. I kind of laugh at that. The Orthodox say, look, we never changed. The Pope changed. Well, the Pope had to change to keep Western Europe at all organized. The Church was the only government when Rome fell. Roman Catholic Church is modeled on Roman law and Roman government. So there were no choices there, but the Orthodox say, look, not only is the view of the atonement a dark view, in their opinion, of Christ and the meaning of Christianity, as opposed to the idea that we can become divine through Christ. But because the Pope claims so much power, this is why the Protestants rebel against the Pope. So these are the two views of Christ. You have the Roman Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox, and we have then Crusades, a false view of Muhammad as an insane, arrogant egomaniac who will kill you if you don't convert to worshiping him. Well, that's not Islam, is it? I mean, I hope we don't think so. I think some people people think that's that religion. But what religion would spread that was really like that? So the Crusades are not forgotten by Muslims. And this is the social structure in Europe. The peasant crusade will even involve a children's crusade where children are marched in front of Turkish Muslim soldiers. And because these peasants believe, Peter the Hermit, because God is guiding these children, they will not be defeated. Do you think they were defeated? The Turkish Muslim soldiers didn't kill the little kids. They just marched them into slavery. That's not too bad, is it? And so there are the many, many crusades, 14. Do you think the Muslim world has forgotten about that? Do you think they might be a little annoyed with Christendom in Europe? Why are you pummeling us? What's the point? What, the Holy Land? They preserved the temples and all this, and Jews and Christians had to pay a little extra tax, but they weren't persecuted or executed. The Quran forbids that. And so there is what Europe's looking like. But here's another thing that happened during the Crusades. You think Americans would ever forget an event like this? Where the Crusaders were starving to such a degree that they got their captured Muslim soldiers and eat them like you might a deer in northern Wisconsin. So that's the Siege of Murat, and that's not like a news report. That's more like a bragging thing. Look what we did to those Turkish Muslim soldiers. As well as beheadings, and then Arabic thinkers, Muslim thinkers, will feed very heavily into people like St. Thomas Aquinas' thought. Science is reintroduced to Europe by way of the Islamic world. In the meantime, the Inquisition takes place. And here we can see Galileo, who will just say, okay, the world is flat, inquisitors. But here is Martin Luther. And this is the beginning of civil war in Europe, as Martin Luther again becomes another anti-temple prophet. Witch burnings take place in this time, but here's the reason for the season for Protestants. He will oppose the Pope and the taking of money for expensive temples in the same way Muhammad did, Jesus did, Amos did. This is a long tradition and a continuing strain in Abrahamic thought. So selling indulgences to get great-granddad out of purgatory seemed ridiculous to him. And of course, Henry VIII needs a divorce, so he creates the Episcopalian or Anglican Church. My own background goes back to this old fellow. He will be a Bible-believing Calvin right here and give rise to Baptists and Presbyterians and all kinds of so-called free churches. We get this civil war in Europe. I've read estimates that 100 million died in this war. It continues on to this day in Northern Ireland and a few other small places. And of course, these guys will be expelled from England for, well, banning color, Cromwell, banning Christmas because it's not in the Bible. And these guys will become the ethos of America. Really Calvinist Protestantism. How many Lutheran presidents have we had? Anybody know? It's very surprising. 0. Only one Catholic. All the rest are Calvinist Protestants, which is very odd, isn't it? So, and we can see the red here. Lutheran land is in blue, Catholic Lutheran land, and the red are Calvinist type churches, the Bible Belt.